Well, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you may be. The front line is loud, but the voices behind it, they're louder. I'm Bob Plaschke, and this is First Response, the number one podcast that takes you behind the badge and uncovers real stories and experiences of first responders from all walks of life and the topics shaping public safety today. Hopefully, you're curious about the human behind the hero, and they are indeed heroes, and the topics that drive policing and firefighting. Well, this is your front row seat, so let's get started. This podcast is sponsored by Pepperball, where I have the honor to serve as the Chief Executive Officer. Pepperball creates non-lethal alternatives to guns that police use to keep themselves and the public they serve safe. Well, today I'm super excited. We're joined by Kristen Neubauer. Kristen has a decorated career in policing in the great state of New York, in the county of Niagara, which is home to Buffalo Bills, where she served honorably and in a dedicated way, making her kind of rising all the way up through to captain. She left the profession 9 years ago, and now, after getting advanced degrees, is a leadership coach and helps organizations like ours, like Pepperball, to better understand how to take lessons learned from policing and apply them to the kind of everyday situations, corporate life, and whatnot. Kristen, it's great to have you. The first question I have, I discussed this before we started the recording, is you'll be the first woman that I've had on who was a senior position as a police officer. When you joined, was it difficult? Was it a difficult choice for you? Was it something you thought a lot about to be a police officer? How did you make your decision to serve?
Well, it wasn't a difficult choice. It seems, looking back, it was quite some time ago now, that it was a career path that I always was drawn to. I had joined the Army Reserves as well, and I liked the paramilitary and the structure. And so it wasn't a difficult choice in the least bit. I didn't second guess anything about it when I went through the process. And luckily, I was blessed to have the career that I had.
And in the training that you went through, so you went through some type of an academy. I assume you were more in the minority than the majority in the context of being a woman at the time?
Yes, I'm trying to remember the number in my academy. There were, let's say, conservatively 25, maybe 27 of us, and I was the only female. And I had more room in the locker room.
You didn't have to wait for a shower.
Right, exactly.
In that, most of all the women that I've met in my day-to-day job at Pepperball, it all ranks. To some degree, I no longer see much of a difference, frankly, between women and men in that sense. They all present themselves in a police kind of a policing like role. So I don't really think about it. That's part because I've been doing this for a long time. But if I were to think about it, there must be differences in terms of being a woman versus a man. So one, you're a minority in that context. So while you do have the locker room to yourself, you are kind of by yourself. Is it easy, hard to be a minority in that kind of a context, in a very, I guess, male dominated profession?
Well, the academy was difficult, right? And that was my experience, that it was difficult just on the face of what it is. My remembering all of those years back at the academy, no, I didn't find anything that stood out that made me feel uncomfortable or made it harder, right? It's already a very difficult situation as far as everyone's under pressure. I would say once you're outside of a pressurized situation is more the time that you can maybe notice some different expectations or different perceptions that people might have. the biggest difficulty of that is simply that, I have my own profession and my own goals. It's just addressing maybe other people's expectations that are based on their expectations. So when you mentioned that you have both males and females on your staff that come from a policing background and you don't see a difference. Well, right, socially, we're socialized in a different way now. We have more women. We get used to certain ways that we see the world, our mental models. And as it slowly changes, we can slowly catch up with it. So for me, in the first part of my career, I did not feel any extraordinary pressure. I hope that's an answer that doesn't put anyone else that's in a position of being the first female or a different diverse position questioning it, but I did not at the academy. It more came after I was on the road, and it was the citizens I was addressing that had a different expectation that those types of challenges or situations would arise.
Well, it's funny you say that as you were answering, and you said in the crucible of the job, or during the time you were doing when you were working together, and particularly in teams, it makes perfect sense to me that there is no differentiation. You're all part of a team. You've got a job to do, and the life and death nature of the job transcends any particular context. I mean, this is what you see in kind of war movies where, people from all walks of life come together, and, they are a band of brothers because you're, the guy next to you or the person next to you has your back, right? They are, you are partnering to accomplish a mission, but you're also partnering to protect each other, so to speak. So kind of all nationalities and races and female, male, all kind of blend away. I think that's what you were trying to say to some degree.
I think so, to some degree, yes. I think that in higher stress situations, given, and this can be for anybody, woman, man, anything as far as diversity goes, if you have conducted yourself in a professional way and you seem competent and able to handle the tasks at hand, your teammates, your coworkers, your surrounding, associates in high level and stress situations are looking to you just do your job, or just get us through this, or do your part, not that you have to carry everyone. And that's, I think that's human nature. Our biases I think oftentimes biases can be overcome by professional excellence or by professional confidence and execution. It doesn't mean that when everything settles down, those biases don't reappear, but hopefully they've shifted some, but that's up to the individual. I can't control that.
Well, then the next thing that you said, which then makes perfect sense, is that it's not your, the police officer you're in the squad car with. It's going to be actually the citizens that will probably bring some biases to viewing a female in a police uniform. When you said the citizens themselves, tell me your experiences in that context.
Right. So let me just clarify that it's, that was my experience. I'm sure that individuals can have the experience of fellow coworkers or fellow officers having a certain opinion or expressing a certain bias. My experience more so was just comments from community members and looking back, from the point I am now in life, I don't know that they were said with
malice.
It was just said out of ignorance. No, malice, perfect word. Right. They weren't said out of malice, whether it be, are you sure you know how to use that? Meaning, my sidearm, or should you be using that? Should you be using that? And oftentimes it would come from an older guy that possibly came from, he's just saying it out of, I don't know how to say this perfectly, but really being concerned for me. And that's the social context that you have to work through and really work on not becoming negative about it, but understanding it deeper. Now, that's not to say there's not situations that people do have malice or don't think you should be where you're at. That occurs for sure. And but in some ways, I think it's handled the same way. Personally, I think it's handled the same way. You got to look at where it's coming from, what the intention is, and do your best to do your best. And really, it's not about them.
Well, and I think I could easily see that, right? It's kind of this naive, this innocent, in quotes, naivete, and someone who would, view you as a daughter, or view you as a sister, not as a police officer, enforcing the law, or at least they would put that kind of a lens on it. And I imagine that it probably was interesting initially, but to your point, over time, it probably just made you more empathetic in some ways.
Yeah. So let me also just clarify. There were times that there was malice too. People do have hard opinions, but over time, I consider myself to be a pretty empathetic person, and I consider that to come more from my upbringing and the types of cases that I handled predominantly as an investigator. I think that really built upon my empathy. I believe when it comes to some maybe social ignorance or some worldviews that contradict, letting me be my best self, I have some empathy, but often and more so than not now, I have some empathy, but I also just move on because I can't change everybody's mind, and that's not my goal in life. So I do have more empathy around that, but I don't know that it gets the highest level of energy from me, if that makes
sense. No, it does. It's what I've had other folks who have served on that side of the blue line. They talk about it. It's you got to be thoughtful about what you absorb and what you take personally, and you really have to, the majority of the feedback that you're getting, you can't take personally and you can't absorb because, to your point, it drains you, it irritates you, frustrates you in a way that's not consistent with your training and not consistent with what you're supposed to do in that job. Which, I always felt, as the amount of patience and the amount of what I would call the ability to depersonalize. When you see a lot of the body cams I see, police officers do a wonderful job of that, an amazing job, right, of not taking things personally. Because it would be, it's just human nature to do it. And so, that's that makes sense. It makes total sense to me. What was the decision to leave policing? Why did you decide to move on to what you're doing now?
Good question. I wasn't anticipating that one. I like that interview style, right? You got to catch them off guard. Well, let me start it off with that. I loved my career. I really did. Was it easy? No. I had a supportive administration. I had a direct boss that was phenomenal. It was purely looking at kind of the time and energy. We're all very different creatures, and I am all in when I'm in something. And I found I wasn't balancing properly in my personal life, my professional life. And I looked at, my goal was to do the 25 years. And I had my military time that I could put on the back of that. And an opportunity arose for me to do some more of some private security. And if I could use this kind of bridge to clarify a little, at the beginning, you mentioned coaching and leadership. That's a huge part of my background and my training. I don't necessarily do it so much now. I would be open to it, but what keeps me professionally busy now is security within corporations, and I'm subcontracted to do that on a team. And that opportunity there that I just mentioned with a different company presented itself for me to do it much more. And I love travel. I love international travel. I love national travel. I love being around cultures I've never been around before, people that I've never been around before. And with that presenting itself and then an opportunity to teach at a local university, I just decided it was time to pass the baton. And I left, at least in my opinion, I left on a high. I was in a position, I had incredible people that I was responsible to. And I just felt like it was a very natural step out instead of getting to a point where unfortunately, I've seen a lot of people in law enforcement that they've put their heart and soul, and when they leave, they're so drained. And I just didn't want to hit that point and leave. I wanted to leave when I was at the point I was at. I hope that answered it.
No, good for you. And actually, there's a number of folks at Pepperball who did exactly that. They left and they continue to they train for Pepperball, but they do a lot of work in private security, and it's a way to use their skills in a different context. The same situation awareness, leadership, and security, frankly. What do you miss? Tell me two things that you miss most about your time as a police officer and executive, and two things that you don't miss. By the way, listeners, I didn't prep her, so she's
yeah, you can see the wheels turning.
Right.
What's very interesting is my first thought is some of the things that I miss the most are some of the things I don't miss as well. So I loved the Detective Investigation Bureau. I love that type of work. I always said I made my way on patrol. I did it well, but I really think my passion was in investigations and leadership. And I miss the teamwork that happens when there's a big case, regardless if it's a homicide, if it's a shooting, if it's a major assault. I miss that teamwork and camaraderie if you have the right people around you. But yet I don't miss the energy that also draws from you. As a captain, I tried to at least be always very mindful of my people's energy levels and where energy was being taken, right? And that includes what's going on at home for them if I'm privy to that information. That includes health issues they might have. That includes what case did they walk in on yesterday? Did they walk in on a suicide or something to do with a child? And now what are they doing today? Right? So that stuff I miss because I really took it to heart, and I felt so much fulfillment from being kind of the guardian of those environments for my employees or my reports. But yet I don't miss how exhausted I would become when I would come home. Right. So it's the balance. Maybe that's one and one.
I'll give you, maybe in the background, you can think of a couple more, but, I want to, we talk a lot about mental health, in the horrific challenge that it presents for police officers. They experience, somewhere between, 40 to 60 traumatic events in their career. An average, person, myself, would experience 3 or 4. It just does take a toll. I hadn't thought about this when the examples people would always give me on these podcasts is, day-to-day patrol, you walk in on a suicide or you see a child abused. I hadn't thought about it, but let me ask, as a detective who's trying to solve the case, you then sit with it for weeks and weeks, right? I mean, it's that visual, that image, the victim stays with you. Is that, it's almost like it's a prolonged exposure to that trauma. Am I thinking about it the right way, or?
Yeah, I actually appreciate that insight that you're actually having that, because that is, and it's, with this, what I'm about to, conversation we're going to have takes nothing away from the patrol experience, because that is absolutely its own kind of, thing to deal with as well. So, but my long-term experience within the Detective Bureau, Investigation Bureau, that's where the majority of my time was spent as a police officer. I was always very mindful of that with the people around me, that, if it's an injured or deceased child or a suicide event, that yes, patrol's exposed, but now, a suicide event, I'd have to take that back, because that does close quicker as long as it's a known suicide. But maybe a homicide, a brutal homicide or something like that, you have ownership of it, right? You feel like, I had a case that involved an infant, that after it closed, I remember after the verdict came down, after there was a sentencing, I asked my supervisor if I could keep the case in my desk. I still felt a level of protection for that child. And even though the outcome was good for the system as far as how it went through, that child still wasn't on this earth, right? So there's a level that you do take it with you. I can, I can feel myself tearing up thinking about it. With that, in a leadership capacity, and I was allowed to lead in a certain way, and I give that credit to the leaders above me at my department at the time, and some are still there. And you really have to be aware of your people's mental health and what they are hanging on to. And by doing that, you almost bring in your skills of an interviewing and different things of that, because you're paying attention to body language, word usage, just physical appearance, conversation tone, ability to engage, all of the above. And as their boss, you just have to step up for them in those ways and try to figure out ways. So yes, I think you do live with it more prolonged. However, I don't want to negate any experience on patrol either, because you are exposed to, in patrol, you're exposed to, like, your emotions are up, and then you're going lights and sirens.
Right.
Yeah, it lights and sirens, and then you have to stop, and then you have to be this gathered together person and fix it all. That is humanly very hard. So, those experiences are different, but the investigative experience is definitely something that you do. There's a level of ownership you feel.
I would imagine day-to-day patrol, to your point, you're always looking around the next corner for the next.
Right.
This is like the jump scare in a bad horror movie. You're on edge waiting for, where in the detective in working a case, it's this extended, it's like reading the script of the horror movie, so to speak, and just being immersed in the pain. I've never talked about this topic on the podcast. As a detective, as a managing the case, you need to deal with the victims' families. It must be horrific to try to interview them, to try to keep them appraised of the case, to those that you close. Does it really even bring closure? I mean, it must be, gratifying in many ways to try to solve it for them, but in what an emotional experience that you have to go through with those families.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's totally accurate. It is emotional. It requires a lot of strength. I think it requires a lot of self-mastery, a lot of self-resilience, a lot of self-care, and to do it right and still be good for yourself and those in your personal life, you have to really be aware of all of those moving parts. And regarding the families, it makes an impact. I think even when you maybe don't get an outcome that would be more acceptable to the family, if you care during the case and you care after the case and you follow up, and there's some cases that you can go, they just stick with you, and it impacts those individuals, just like us in our personal lives, right? When someone goes out of their way, when they know we're a busy individual, or look at, you're the CEO of Pepperball, and for whatever reason, you reach out during a very busy day and check in with someone that they wouldn't expect you to. That means a lot. And that doesn't fill the hole that they might have, but at least it lets people know that someone else truly did care about the outcome. And, it's a high expectation to place. Let me say that. I'll keep going back to that. At least if you approach your situations that way, it's how I would try. I didn't always succeed. And I would see so many of my people do it this way. I just had an incredible staff. And all you can do is do your best. And when you keep that communication or you follow up, it does make a difference. With that, your caseload can be phenomenal, right? So socially, there can be an expectation of that on every case. And sometimes it's just not humanly possible.
Moving on, it's such a rich area. I think, I always go back to these discussions, and I always say to myself, you people so underappreciate the emotional challenge of this of policing, whether it be the day-to-day patrol, jump scare, constantly on edge, or it be this engaging with families who are going through horrific pain, where you have to, you are a pillar of strength that they lean on, and they use as part of their recovery. Right, you are part of their path, hopefully back to some degree of processing what they're going through. It's such an emotional toll. It's humbling, I think, is maybe the best way of saying it. And I just don't think people really appreciate it. Nothing for you to, you're happy to comment on it. I'm just more making an observation. What you do now, and being and teaching, what lessons were you able to draw from what you did in the policing world to what you do now? How has it helped you do what you do?
Massively, obviously awareness, risk assessments, awareness. Communication is the foundation, right? So a good patrol officer, a good investigator, detective, leader, they communicate well. They set an expectation of communication. They're clear. They communicate to the person, not how you think it needs to be delivered, but how they need to receive it. And that experience over a number of years, mainly in the interview room and then with my my office and whatnot, has been beyond beneficial to talking to individuals in the corporate sector and being able to understand where the level of understanding they have, and then being able to deliver the information around security in a way that is understandable to them, and how it in a way that it's valuable to them. So I would say communication and the opportunities, we talk about all the challenges and struggles with law enforcement, and they do exist. It's also one of those careers that give you opportunities, speaking just obviously from my experience. I don't have any other career in the past, but it gives you an opportunity to really, really build upon your skill set of being a good human, right? Or communicating, being observant with people, even in the boardroom. And then getting your message across in a way that is accepted and in a learning environment. So that's my biggest takeaway.
And I'll echo that in the sense of, or reinforce it in the retired police officers that we have on staff at Pepperball. As you were talking, I realized that as they communicate to me, it's different how they communicate to each other. And I know that they are empathetic and sensitive. So, for example, simple example, I do not own a gun, and I'm not a gun owner, right? And so they are, of course. And so how they talk to me about gun ownership is a interesting, is an example of how they have to understand my orientation, and they'll teach me. They've taken me out to show me how to use a firearm, and they're to your point, they're very agile emotionally and intellectually in understanding the audience and how to tailor the message. And I think that's an underappreciated benefit that you get out of policing.
Big time, huge.
Now, this is more a curiosity question. And as I tell my friends and particularly my 4 boys, that police officers are fantastically attuned to people who lie and to people who bullshit. They are. You have a huge bullshit meter kind of sensor. Is that? Do you? I assume that carried with you after you left the profession?
Well, it sounds kind of mystical, so I hope it did. What's my bullshit reader? I would hesitate to say that I can read someone and know I ask questions, right? And oftentimes, that whether it's a taught skill or otherwise, just in watching people and how they deliver, mind you, you have to know who they are prior to talking to them, right? So someone may be stiff all their life, but I don't know if I don't know if I have a great bullshit reader, but I do ask a lot of questions and then I do formulate my opinion. And oftentimes I'm right. With that being said, you brought up an interesting thought. If I could expand on it, and it kind of takes a little bit out of the realm of of what you just said, is that used to be a talking point when we would talk in our office or in trainings around investigation and interviewing. Is a big thing about going into an interview. You have to be prepared to move in any direction, right? I love the word agile that you used in our thinking. So in an interview, especially with a suspect, because they're trying to evade the truth, if in fact they're guilty, you have to be prepared. If they say this, you're going to go here. If they say this, you're going to go here. And it's a lot going on. And with all of that, you then also have to constantly check your own bias, right? So
yeah.
we're like, oh, this person's lying to me. And darn well, there's always points in our life that something comes up. We're like, oh, wow, they weren't. So when you're doing an interview, you have to really go with your gut while keeping an open mind that you might be wrong, because we're not truth tellers, and nor are we judge and jury, right? So I think we have pretty good bullshit meters. However, I don't rely on it completely. Now in my life, at this point in my life, my bullshit reader tells me when to walk away. I don't want to deal with that anymore.
Correct.
So yeah.
Well, but that's and
I'm not putting you to sleep, am I?
No. When I close my eyes, the audience can't see. We can see each other, and so I'm closing my eyes because I'm deep in thought. It's the question that comes. I hadn't thought about it, but it's probably very true. Is you have to be, when you walk into someone in an interrogation, you have to be, to some degree, intellectually, to your point, agile, but you have to be intellectually honest. You can't go in and you can't let your instincts drive a conclusion, because I would imagine that in some cases your instincts were wrong, right? Where you thought the person was guilty and then they turned out not to be, and the vice versa. Was that more the case than not? Or, there's no way to measure that, where you had a suspicion and you were wrong, or you had a suspicion and you were right.
I really don't have a percentage on that. But what I would say is I was very high percentage on gathering as much evidence that was possible and then letting the conclusion show itself. That was my goal. You really have to gather as much evidence as possible. And if you go into an interview with a ton of really solid evidence or a good gut feeling, it's going to guide your questions. With that, though, you may not get the end result you want. All you can do is the best thing you can do, right? All you can do is the best. So percentage wise, I really couldn't tell you, if my gut was right 50% of the time or wrong 50% of the time. Not really sure on that. But I know that I always tried to get as much evidence documented and otherwise, so that in all honesty, that is shown at a jury. So when in my investigative years, I predominantly did sex crimes and adult and child abuse. So those go to trial a lot. And my theory is no one wants to admit to any of that stuff. So oftentimes they go to trial because then they can go to prison, even still telling their family they're innocent. Does that make any sense?
Oh, it makes a heck of a lot of sense.
So I was in a courtroom a lot for testifying. And a lot of times that taught me a lot too, is you have to make sure that you aren't doing things only on gut. Gut is really important, but you also have to be able to present it to people and say, this is what it is. It's based on evidence at the end of the day.
Well, I was on a call before we started here with the fire chief, and he was making, as you know, firefighters, they're like the brothers to the police officers, and they kid each other about their tendencies.
Yes.
And he was saying something to the effect, he said, well, fire chiefs are just too polite to give you feedback, and police chiefs are too suspicious to and maybe it's not that they're too suspicious, is that I think police officers are, that they accept that the truth is not particularly obvious, and so they will not take anything at face value because they've seen where they've been right and they've seen where they've been wrong. And so taking something at face value is not what a police officer does. They have to actually, to your point, is that in your role you have to unearth the full set of facts and the full story, and let the facts play out.
Right. They're naturally inquisitive in nature, I would think.
Well, Kristen, I hadn't even looked at the clock. I'm well beyond the time that most people will let me drone on. This has been so fascinating, and I've learned so much. Thank you. I did have one last question for you as we kind of conclude. We like to make a small donation to a charity of your choice. And appreciate if you could tell us what charity we could make that donation to.
Sure, that's very generous of you. In Niagara County, there's a organization called Serve Niagara, SERV Niagara, and they serve veterans in the area, predominantly around the holiday season. So it's kind of apropos as well for the season. So that would be my choice.
Well, fantastic. Serve Niagara.
Yes.
Kristen, thank you so much for taking the time. It was great to have you on, and thank you for sharing your experience both today and kind of in the past, and at least for me, a lot of lessons learned. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. I enjoyed the conversation.
Well, folks, this was fascinating. I kind of came into the discussion with an interest in what a woman goes through, and why they join, some of the challenges they face. And I walked away learning a lot more about not so much a woman. It reminded me that, it's a band of, they are police officers in the pitch of the battle. They do their jobs and they don't really look at each other as a man or a woman or black or white, or that's not really relevant. And so the discussion around being a woman or not was less interesting and far more interesting to learn how a detective thinks and some of the emotional and mental challenges that detective takes on. And it really opened up this notion of me understanding that police officers are not, suspicious. What they are is they don't take things at face value, and that they're trained and they're paid, and we want them not to take things at face value. We need them to not react to their instincts. We need them to be focused on unearthing facts and unearthing what really happened, because that is the nature of policing, particularly in the investigative side of it. So I came in with one point of view, and I now leave with another, which I'm deeply grateful for helping. So we wrap up here. For those listening during the holidays, let me say happy holidays to you. But then let me finish up by saying this is another episode of First Response. This is a podcast that tries to talk about first responders and what they deal with, and their kind of how they are as humans behind the badge. I will thank again Pepperball, who sponsors this podcast, where I am the CEO. And Pepperball, as you may know or not know, creates non-lethal alternatives to guns that police use to keep themselves and their public safe. So thanks very much. I wish everyone a happy holidays, and we'll probably see you on the other side of 2026.